My name is Rosemary Thornton. I live in the Midwest because I love watching corn grow. I have written 10 books, 9 of them focused mainly on historical architecture. My 10th book, the one I really hesitated to write, is about my near-death experience. I suppose my near-death experience story begins in 2016. At that time, I had been married for 10 years, and my husband was a successful professional. We thought we had a very good life. I was a writer. I had written for newspapers, magazines, books, everything. Then one day he came home for lunch and took his own life. I practically lost my mind. As a writer, a sensitive soul and empath, I truly lost control. Our last conversation hadn't been pleasant. He started an argument over the phone, ended the call, and then took his own life. So the guilt, self-blame and grief I felt were overwhelming, to say the least. It was immense. For 29 months, I was a wreck. Every night, I said 3 prayers. The first was, God, heal me or let me go. My second prayer was, no more tough decisions. I had to face so many tough decisions after his death. When someone takes their own life so suddenly, there are many legal matters that need to be resolved. And my third prayer. I had been fascinated by near-death experiences, NDEs, all my life. I mean, really fascinated. When Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life, came out, I think that little paperback was released in '76. I read it over and over. Then there were Dannion Brinkley and Betty Eady and all those people. Their stories drew me in so powerfully, and I loved reading them. My third prayer was that I wanted to be forgiven for the life review. I didn't want to go through all that mess. Having experienced it once and seen how hellish that existence was, I begged God, when I go, please skip the life review part. And I suppose a few weeks later, I met with a financial advisor because I now had to manage my own budget and finances. She was very upbeat, this financial advisor. Cheerful people make me very nervous, but she said, Rosemary, where do you see yourself in 2 years? Honestly, I had no expectations of surviving that long. And she said, that's not very positive. I replied, well, it's the truth. Like I said, I pray to God every night, either let me go or heal me. And I couldn't see any way I was going to be healed. Then, 29 months after my husband passed, I was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. At that moment, I was really angry at God because I thought, you know what? I was very clear. Heal me or let me go. I didn't mean gradually. I meant just lie down and leave. So I went through the usual appointments with oncologists, and I was scheduled to start chemotherapy and radiation, all that mess. I was so scared, thinking, haven't I suffered enough? Can we just skip this part and let me go? Then, I had surgery scheduled, and something went wrong during the procedure. When I woke up in the recovery room after the surgery, I was bleeding heavily. I told the nurse, hey, I'm bleeding a lot. She said, oh, that's perfectly normal for what we did. Can you just wait? But I thought, no, something's really wrong. I told her 3 times. She said, why don't you go home and lie down in your own bed? You'll be fine. Since then, I've learned this was gynecological cancer, that bleeding in gynecological cases is considered a life-threatening emergency, as it should be. But I obediently went home. This was really my first experience with the medical world because I was raised to believe in prayer for healing. Also, I believed that when you're really stressed, that's when illness tends to settle in. It suppresses your immune system. I know that's not true for everyone, but for me, I'd had a lot of success just calming down, saying some prayers and trusting the process. We are built to heal. We are designed to heal. We are not designed to get progressively sicker. So I went home, and I hadn't been home long when I realized things were getting much worse. At that point, I was bleeding quite heavily, and I had this beautiful, almost white wall-to-wall carpeted house. I had waited my whole life to have a white carpet, so I was very worried about ruining the carpet. I was less worried about bleeding to death and more concerned about ruining the carpet because, you know, that's a real nightmare to clean up, cleaning a house after that. So I actually went and stood in my shower and thought, well, at least I can't make a mess here. I was thinking about, I believe it's 1 Corinthians 10:13, which says, God will show you a way out. And I thought, you know, I went to the doctor, I did everything I was supposed to do, now I'm bleeding to death. Maybe this is God's mercy, maybe this is my way out. I really thought long and hard about that, and I thought, you know, all I have to do is sit on the floor of this shower and I'm out of here, and nobody will say anything except, oh, what a shame. They went to the doctor, he messed it up, the end. And I really thought a lot about that. Then I thought, so many people rushed to save me. I mean, people really worked hard trying to save me. There's a painting by Vincent van Gogh called The Good Samaritan, and in that painting, it shows the tremendous effort the Good Samaritan is making to lift the injured traveller onto his beast of burden to take him to the inn. And I realised, looking at that painting, that the painting I had in my house for a while really moved me deeply. But I realised that so many people put in so much effort to keep me alive that I kind of had a duty to keep living for them. So I got out of the shower and called my friends who were in the living room and said, I'm bleeding to death. We need to call an ambulance. The ambulance came, took me to a small emergency room. It was standalone, didn't have a hospital attached, which I think we shouldn't do anymore. Standalone emergency rooms. They made some more mistakes. Again, they didn't take my concerns seriously. Honestly, the janitor who had to clean up after I tried to walk through the facility was more concerned about me than the medical staff, because he was like, oh my gosh, what happened in this hallway? I was bleeding heavily, and they put me in a small cubicle. I was given an injection for pain that was actually a morphine derivative, which really, you know, I've given this talk a few times to live audiences, and when I do, I like to look at the crowd and I can see the medical staff. When I mentioned that while my blood pressure was dropping and I was bleeding, they gave me a morphine derivative. Every medical professional in the audience stands up, but they don't intervene and just leave me alone in the room. In fact, just before that, this nurse had been by my side while the doctor was examining me. This very sweet, genuinely caring nurse took my hand, and at that moment I was truly scared. I mean, genuinely terrified. One thing is thinking, oh, I wish I were dead. Another is knowing the bus is coming for you, and it won't be long now. I told her, promise me you won't let me die. She was so kind. She said, honey, we have many solutions for this. We're not going to let you die. That comforted me. Then after that, they gave me the pain relief injection and left the room. Well, my friend was still there with me. He sat by the gurney and said that after the injection, I passed out very quickly. Meanwhile, he said my blood pressure. They had one of those automatic monitors on me that kept clicking, but he said my blood pressure kept falling and falling and falling. It got down to 32/25 and then it gave an error. But during that time, I was having the best time of my life. You know, it was so close that my last words on earth were, this is really good, before I passed out. I mean, you know? The room was spinning around me, everything felt amazing, and then I lost consciousness. I realized I was coming out of my body like toast popping out of a toaster. I mean, the way I came out was very dramatic, and the moment I started floating further away from my body, I knew exactly what was happening. I think we need to give much more credit to our soul for having awareness or knowledge of what is going on. And sometimes I believe life in modern society is so static that we lose those transmission signals. But in this experience, my first thought was, am I dying or not? My initial thought was, my heart stopped, and I wondered, how do I know that? I don't know how I know, but I just do. Then my next thought was, I'm dying. Being a lifelong writer and editor, I said, you're not actually dying, you're dead. Because when you reach your reward, the most important thing is to get your verb tense right. But what struck me as very funny, and I actually laughed out loud because here I was, floating away from my body, with no intention of ever coming back. I realized that everything I truly am came with me. My voice sounded the same, my laughter was the same, my morbid sense of humor was the same, even my intellect, as I observed this new environment I was in. I can't express how comforting it was to know that everything I truly am had transitioned. And I thought, in fact, I asked myself what was left behind on that gurney, and I thought, fear, anxiety, guilt, regret, doubts, worries, disgust, self-reproach, all of that. I didn't have a life review, which was a relief. But what stood out to me was remembering the firefighters who came to my house to put me in that ambulance. I remember how kind, attentive and caring they were. They were such gentle souls, so nice to me. I just remembered how much love they showed me and how much that touched me. I mean, I was a complete stranger to them. Moving forward in this experience, I was really excited to be out of this world. One of the thoughts I had was, I was really worried about all those bills that had come in. I was living on a very tight budget and thought, those bills are no longer a problem. I also remember thinking that I was supposed to start a chemotherapy tutorial on Monday, preparing for treatment, and I thought, that's no longer a problem. I'm not going to need that. Besides, I was supposed to go to the radiation center to get a tattoo, and I thought, none of this is going to be a problem for me ever again. I was so relieved. My whole life, I've kept a daily gratitude list of 5 things I'm thankful for every morning. And during this experience, I kept thinking, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful, I'm so grateful. It's over. I truly felt as if I had been granted an early release for good behavior from this mad asylum we call Earth. I really felt it. I was free. I was so happy. And I also remember thinking, my whole life I've wondered what would get me out of here, and how funny that my first real encounter with the medical world was what got me out. Going to the doctor and being admitted to the hospital once, boom, you're out. That was really rich. I found so much humor in that, even in this experience. So many thoughts were rushing through my mind at the same time. I've often compared it to living this life at 60 amps. And when I died, it was like I shot up to 100,000 amps. There were so many ideas, so many directions, so many thoughts. One of my first encounters was floating in darkness, and I heard people call it a velvety perfect raisin. That's a good description. It brought me comfort. I don't even remember thinking. I've had so much fear of the dark since my husband died, and yet, in this darkness, I felt the most perfect peace. It was as if I was generating peace. Not only was I wrapped in peace, but I was actively creating peace. And oh, what a wonderful feeling that is for someone who has struggled with anxiety their whole life. That was pure happiness, truly. But I felt a massive presence join me, and I looked up, as if behind me, to see who had joined me in this perfect darkness. I thought, how interesting that I'm turning my head and looking over my left shoulder, so I must have some kind of human form even now. That was really cool. I looked up at this being and said, "And who are you?" Because I was genuinely happy. I can't explain it. It was the greatest happiness I've known in conscious, real memory. It hasn't been an easy life. And before I could finish the question, the answer came immediately. I didn't even finish asking, and the answer was, "You, Rosemary, you are the image and likeness. I am the original." I thought, wow, that's Genesis 1:25 and 26. I've wondered about that my whole life. What does it mean to be made in the image and likeness? I thought, oh, there's an original and I'm talking to her. It was simply wonderful. And one of the most common criticisms I get about my writing is that I refer to God as she. But if you're a woman and you come across the original text, it just feels like she. Then the other part is that I grew up with a very, very stingy father, and when I was 14, he left. But my mother was like me. She experienced love, she knew love, and she trusted. So when people talked about God the Father, I thought, oh no, let's not go there. But I could imagine God as a loving mother. So this idea that I was made in her image and that there was an original, I remember thinking, it would have been nice to know that back then, but it's still meaningful information. What's the next step? So many thoughts went through my mind at that moment. One of them was a Bible verse from Paul, where he talks about the peace that surpasses all understanding. And I thought, this is that peace. This is what Paul was referring to. This is the peace you can never put into words, never explain. There are no adequate words. This is that perfect peace. The word perfect means whole. Isn't that interesting? And the word integrity also means whole. So yes, it's a complete piece with no gaps for anything ugly to slip through. And then there was so much more that happened there. If when I came back you had told me I'd been gone for a couple of days, I would have believed you. And that's another thing. I don't know if you've heard of the Grayson scale, which measures the depth of an NDE, named after Dr. Bruce Grayson. One of the things it notes is a distortion of time. If you're gone for 10 minutes but it feels like 10 hours, according to Dr. Grayson, that suggests an exceptionally deep NDE. But in my experience, it just kept going and going and going. One of the things that happened was that I remembered talking to an angel. I had this companion alongside me, a spiritual guide moving with me through the experience as I drifted further and further away from my body. And I said to him, "All this darkness, floating peace, I've been here before. As in this experience from 59 years ago, there's something very familiar about it." And she said, "Remember, your mother told you that when you were a baby, they declared you dead." The hospital's policy in 1959 was not to allow the mother to stay and watch her child die. So my mother went home and stayed with a friend from church. They spent the night praying, and the next morning when they came back, I was, according to my mother, not just better but healed from whatever was shutting down my organs, my kidneys. In fact, my mother had been sent home from the hospital when I was a baby and was told, "Go focus on your other children. This one is gone." Then the angel said, "You know, that experience wasn't just that you came close to death. You actually crossed over and returned." And I thought, oh, that explains so much. It would have been nice to know that back then, but okay, cool. What's next? But I think that explains why I've always been fascinated by NDEs and why I could experience things others couldn't. My father even turned it into a party trick when I was 5 or 6. He had me play games communicating telepathically with others and listening to others telepathically. My mother put a stop to that, but it explained a lot. All my life I felt very different, like an exception, like someone who didn't quite fit in. Oh my God, there's a quote, I think it's by St. Francis of Assisi, that says we should never be too comfortable in this world. And I thought, yes, I get that. What is it like to be comfortable in this world? So that explained a lot about my life. And then, somewhere in this experience, the floating stopped, and I was in a white room. What amazes me is that I don't remember the transition from floating in darkness to standing on my own feet in this white room. I think things happened there that either I don't have the capacity or awareness to understand or remember, or it's the angel saying, "Yes, let's have a little fun here. We'll do something and you're not going to know about it." But I was in this white room standing, having moved from floating, and in the white room, I couldn't see the walls, but I could see a door in front of me. Having read all those books about NDEs, I knew exactly what that door was, and I thought, okay, everyone step aside, let's go through the door. We don't need to chat or talk about anything. I'm going to get to that door as fast as I can. The door was probably about 15 feet in front of me, and the room was filled with the most perfect white light that surprisingly didn't hurt my eyes. There was a mist falling, almost like what you'd call pea soup fog. It was very dense but moving, swirling around me. It was really cool. I see that door and I literally remember thinking, I don't know if I have legs or feet. I wish I had looked down, but I thought, I can walk with purpose toward that door. Then I thought, yes, I want to be at that door. So I moved as fast as I could toward it. As I walked, I saw the light, or rather the mist, just swirling around me, and I still had a spirit companion, an angel with me. I tried to focus on an individual particle of the vapor and asked my companion, why can't I see that? Why can't I focus? Next time you're in a fog, try to focus on a single droplet. But the angel said, your spiritual eyes haven't yet adjusted to this new environment, but what you're seeing are particles of light. It was like a spiritual car wash, where all the dirt of the earth has to be washed away from us. Some people get so used to their illness that they think it's part of who they are, but it's not. That's what this light does. It cleanses us and prepares us for heaven. Like a friend of mine said, leave your muddy boots at the door, somewhere in this experience. I don't really know the exact timeline because what even is chronology? Past, present, future. Yet Einstein said, for those of us who are physicists, The past, present, and future are just an illusion, however persistent it may be. So I wonder if we create this timeline, or if it's just how our brain organizes things. But during this experience somewhere, the angel told me that if I agreed to return, I would be restored to wholeness. And I thought, okay, well, get out of my way. I really want to get through that door. Then I reached the door, and it was closed. And I remember thinking the door should be open, but it was closed. I raised my right hand to push the door, quite fascinated by the fact that I am right-handed on earth and right-handed in paradise. I thought, wow, we really do carry so much of who we are with us. But as I lifted my right hand to push the door, I paused and asked, is this the divine will for my life? Do you realize that this silly little medical mistake brought me here? Again, I couldn't get past the words. Is this the divine will? And the answer came instantly, not just as words, but as a surge of understanding. The answer was, no, it is not. But whatever decision you make, you carry with you all of God's mercy, blessings, love, and care. There is no wrong choice. And wow, talk about decision fatigue. I had plenty of that in my earthly life, so to be freed from it was a relief. Choosing whether to go to heaven or return to earth is a huge decision. I loved that there was no wrong choice in this experience. Then I said, okay, well, I know what I'm doing. I'm leaving. And once again, I moved to go through the door. Then I was shown a vision of that very maternal nurse who had held my hand at the end. It was more than a vision, as if I was silently, invisibly placed in a room with her, watching her experience. People ask me, was that actually happening? No, I don't think it was a literal event. It seemed more like a glimpse of possible futures. In this vision, that kind nurse was sitting on a metal stool in the middle of a hospital supply room, surrounded by all the equipment you'd expect to see there. She was leaning forward on the stool head in her hands, crying uncontrollably, and said, I promised that woman I wouldn't let her die, and I lost her. I thought, oh great, an empath's worst nightmare, hooked like a fish. Then I thought, she looks about my age. She's lost her patience, but she'll get through it, she'll move on, she'll be okay. But then not only did they show me the vision, they also showed me the pain she was feeling. I felt it deep inside in my core. That profound pain was familiar. It was like the intense regret I felt after my husband passed away. I remember thinking, if I can save even one person from so much suffering on this earth, I feel like I have to come back. And wow, that was heartbreaking. I mean, I lowered my right hand back to my side, and just like that, in a split second, I was back in my body on a stretcher in that small emergency room. I recall looking up and, yes, I had an oxygen mask on. I looked up thinking, well, I'm in a different room. They must have moved me. I was transferred at some point, and I remember there was an angel in the upper left corner of the room. By angel, I know it sounds strange, right? I really wish I'd had a more traditional experience. It would have been easier to talk about, but it was just this ball of energy and light, with beautiful colors swirling in the upper left corner. And I said to her, hey, do you realize how much effort it took to die? Do you know what a big deal that was? Do you know how terrifying it was? But then it's over, and now I'm back. Seriously, what's the problem? I don't want to come back here. And she looked at me. Honestly, the expression I got from her was, hello, you're back. They don't answer questions. Don't bother asking, you know. But the nurse, and again, I don't know if it was the same nurse, because now everyone in that small emergency room was gathered around my room. I even found out the receptionist had been called in to help with me. But the nurse was right there in front of me. My glasses were off my head, but I had an oxygen mask on and was in a much bigger room. She said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Rosemary." Then she asked, "What year is it?" And I answered, 20. Then she asked, "Where are you?" And I replied, a bad excuse for an emergency room, which she didn't appreciate. But then they kept me in the hospital for several days. Actually, I think it was 4 days. And my time in the hospital was also very intense. At one point, a nurse came into the room because once you've died due to medical errors and come back, you get all the doctors and nurses who are at the top of their game. You don't get the ones who ask, "Can you spell this word for me?" Which actually did happen to me during my medical history. But yes, this nurse came in around 2 in the morning or so to check on me, and she smiled at me, and I was kind of, still half in and out of it. But when she smiled, it was like the whole room lit up. There was so much light, and I just felt the love behind that smile. I think maybe we should spend more of our lives smiling at people. It was as if the room exploded with light, and I started to sob. She came over to me and said, "Are you okay?" And I replied, "Yes, it's just your smile. You bring so much light and beauty into this room." I know they probably thought I was the odd one in that hospital, but another thing that happened was that I had several friends. I think 2 or 3 took turns sitting with me. Because when you're not feeling your best, it's comforting to have someone by your side in the hospital. And when they left, angels would appear around my bed, on 3 sides of the bed, both sides and the foot. They sang the most beautiful songs, praising God. They were about 6.5, 7 feet tall, dressed in robes of light that shone brilliantly. And the more they sang praises to God, the brighter those robes became. And the brighter the light, the more they sang. I told them, "I'm really good with remembering places. I have an amazing memory." I said, "But melodies and lyrics, not so much." And they replied, "This isn't for you to remember. This is for your peace. This is for your healing. And this is a thank you for agreeing to come back." I used to say I'd remember this until the day I die, but honestly, I won't forget the angels singing to me for all eternity. And when I came back from that experience, my abdomen still felt pretty messed up. There was some pain, and I'd ask the angels, "Am I going to die again?" Because it seems like a lot of work to go through this once more. And they would say, "No, we're still making some adjustments. Things aren't quite right yet, but we're taking care of it. I just can't explain it." When people come back from this, they often say they feel half in this world and half in the other. Not me. I felt 95% in that other world and 5% in this one, and I wanted to stay in that world forever. And yet again, the noise, the static, the pressure, the depression, the sadness, all the baggage of this world, tend to overwhelm and suffocate all that spiritual beauty. I mean, we're here on earth to be good, to do good, to love, to be kind, to be wise. And I believe we can't do that if we remain completely tuned into the angels. Honestly, I don't know anyone who can. So they sent me home. I didn't want to go home because in the hospital 3 times a day, actually more than that, they come to you with food. And in between, they bring you apple juice and anything else you want, which is great. I love it when people bring me food. I didn't want to leave, and my doctor said, "It's time for you to go home." He said, "Your white blood cell count is really low." He said, "All it takes is an opportunistic infection to get you out of here, and we won't be able to save you." He said, "The chances of you bleeding out now are minimal." And one of the things that happened, and I hope this isn't too much for people, but it really touched my heart when they brought me back. One of the things I learned about this, I actually interviewed some people from the emergency room, a doctor and a couple of nurses, for my book. When someone dies from bleeding and the heart stops, which by the way was my cause of death, they can't just do CPR because that just pushes more blood out. So what they do, a doctor explained to me, is they seal the leak, refill the tank, and then restart the heart. So I had been gone for more than 10 minutes, and according to medical theory, I should have returned mentally compromised. But I truly felt I came back with a big upgrade, a huge, huge upgrade. I came back feeling very different, and all that pain and everything about my husband just faded away, I was only left able to miss him, wishing he had made better choices, wishing things had been different. But that guilt, regret, self-hatred, and aversion toward myself, that just vanished. And the angels told me, because the angels kept speaking to me after I returned. The angels told me that it had all been encapsulated and said, "It's a messy thing, but it can't hurt you. It is sealed in a way that can never hurt you or cause you pain again." And that has been a blessing. It has truly been a great blessing. And this has proven to be true. This happened about 6 years ago now. So actually what I wanted to share is a story I haven't told anywhere else. When they were patching up the leak in the emergency room, they stuffed me with gauze, like a bird. Then there came a day in the hospital when they had to remove all that bandaging, and there was a lot of concern that taking it off would cause the bleeding to start again. This was very moving for me because my experiences with the medical world hadn't been great, But a surgeon came in, along with some nurses and medical staff, for this big removal of the gauze and everything else. I said, "I'm a little scared. I don't want to start bleeding to death now, I've already been through all this." And what the doctor said was, "Miss Thornton, we have an operating room reserved. We have an OR booked." He said, "We're ready. If anything happens, we'll take you right away and operate and fix it." He said, "But you're not going to die." I'm trying not to get emotional. Ronald Reagan once said, "If you tell a story often enough, you can take the emotion out of it." I'm failing. But after this experience of being treated with such indifference by the nurses and medical staff and being told, "Oh, go home and lie down, or it's fine, or we'll find you a transfer to the hospital soon," what did that small group of medical professionals say to me? "We're not going to let you die on our watch." Oh my God, it was a life-changing moment. So, I went home and received good care for 2 weeks. Friends and loved ones surrounded me and took care of me for 2 weeks. Then I went back to the doctor and had blood tests done. In fact, it was 14 days after they had declared me dead, and the doctor said it would take about 2 to 3 months for the shortness of breath to end. Every time I stood up, I would faint until the shortness of breath eased and my white blood cell count returned to normal, along with all these other things, and I noticed that I started to improve very quickly at home. When the blood tests came back, the doctor looked at them and said, "There's a problem with your blood work." And I asked, "What is it?" He replied, "Well, there's been a mistake." I said, "What mistake?" He answered, "Everything is perfect. By the book down to the decimal, all your numbers are perfect." This was 14 days after my heart stopped due to bleeding. And I said, "No, that can't be right because I'm back on my bike. I'm riding my bike again." He said, "What?" I replied, "Yes, I feel good. I'm going a bit slow, taking it easy." That was my first sign that something quite extraordinary had happened. Then came the second. I had to find another doctor on the other side of the state to see me. The first doctor I returned to was a prominent, experienced oncologist. I went back to him and said, "Good news. I'd like to be sure, but I'm almost certain I was healed in heaven." He said, "Hey, you're starting chemotherapy as soon as your blood cell counts come back up." Then he added, "They now have patient portals where you can log in and see what they say." He had put mental illness in my medical record, so I had to find another doctor across the state. She was about 60 miles away and I had to go through all kinds of tests again. Finally, she performed another surgical biopsy, which was a big deal. A big deal. She took tissue from all sorts of places, She took tissue from places I didn't even know you could take it from, but yes, they opened me up, took a lot of tissue, and then it was confirmed. Well, that surgeon was an obstetric gynecologist. Wait, what do you call that? Gynecological oncologist, that's a mouthful. She actually came out of surgery and greeted my friend who was waiting outside in the waiting room for me. She threw her arms around his neck and said, "She's right, there isn't a single cancer cell." And she said, "In fact, your tissue is so pink, healthy and perfect. If it weren't for all the previous tests, from the other doctors," she said, "I wouldn't even believe you ever had cancer." And that was a big deal. It was huge to be freed from that. And when I got home, I think it was after all my guests had left. It was so much fun having all those people at home taking care of me. But when I was alone at home, I picked up my Bible, and it opened to Psalm 23. One phrase in Psalm 23 seemed to be highlighted. It looked like a light was shining on it, and it was, "He restores my soul." And I thought, that's true healing. My soul was reset and restored, and that was a big deal. So after this, I sold everything I owned. Not everything, but I sold a lot of things. I sold my car. I had a really nice car, but I wanted to live a simpler life. I moved about a mile west of the Midwest because I wanted to watch the corn grow, which is my favorite thing, and I eventually bought a house. It took a few years, but I finally bought a house on the edge of a field, and this year the farmer planted soybeans. I thought, "My friend Tony the farmer," I said, "Tony, I want to see some corn." He told me, "Well, I have to rotate with soybeans. So now I can look out my back door and watch things grow, which makes me very, very happy." I think I even put that in a dating profile once. I like watching corn grow. People thought I was kind of crazy, but I meant it seriously. I like it. Who doesn't enjoy seeing things grow? Isn't it amazing? You know, people hear this story. I've told it several times and they assume my life is perfect now. It's not. It's not. But I feel so much joy hearing that my story helps others. A friend shared this with me and I put it on my wall, in about 20 places in my house. It said, "God, please help me heal so I can help others heal. I want to help others heal. That's my #1 goal." Through this experience, I learned to stop blaming myself, and yes, I can say it was a life-changing event. I was on a bad path. So the greatest blessing in my life now is receiving so many emails every day from people telling me, "Yes, your story helped take some of the weight off my heart." If I had to sum up this experience, this near-death experience, in just 3 words, they would be, "Welcome home, dear." When I was floating in that darkness, I felt so surrounded by beings who loved me so much. It was like all these voices were saying, "You're back, here you are. Look at you, we're so happy to see you." The phrase, "Welcome home, dear," was constant, like everyone was just so happy to be with me again. I learned that despite our flaws, silliness, minor sins, and all the little mistakes we make, these are insignificant compared to the amount of love we have. I also learned, and this was a huge lesson for me, that God, of course, loves us, but God and the angels truly, truly want us. They look at us through a clear lens, knowing who we really are, and they are completely in love with us, just crazy about us, like when a mother holds her newborn for the first time and looks into its eyes, seeing only perfection, potential, and promise. I felt so loved, completely wrapped in perfect love.